What's something that sounds fake but is 100 real? Story 1. Greenland is 14 times larger than Africa. I can't be sure, but I swear I heard someone say 14 Africas can fit into one Greenland because of how flat maps stretch. Edit, it's vice versa. Africa is 14 times larger than Greenland. I got them confused, but the fact still stands. Story 2. In America, businessman determines your health, even makes the choice of life and passing for you, not your doctor. Story 3. The birthday paradox is a probability theory stating that in a group of just 23 people, there is a 50-7 chance that at least 2 people share the same birthday. Story 4. Sharks are older than trees. Sharks have been around for about 400 million years, while trees only appeared about 350 million years ago. Story 5. There are lifelong medicines that cost $200 a month. Imagine the healthcare expense for someone on Strinsic for 6 or 7 decades. Story 6. The New Zealand awida is the only insect in the world which can freeze itself solid for a century and live. Story 7. The average human body is relatively closer to the length of the observable universe, 46.5 billion light years, than it is to the Planck length, 1/6 meters, the smallest measurable distance. Story 8. Every time you shuffle a deck of standard playing cards, the order of those 52 cards has never existed before in history. Story 9. The Eld Mesa, or fire mass. During the 1783-84 eruption of Laki in Iceland, the town of Clauster was threatened by the lava flows coming out of the Skafta River Gorge, and the village priest, John Steingrimson, led the congregation in prayer for God to spare them. Either God or Mother Nature obliged, and the lava stopped short of the village. Tributaries of the Skafta that were initially dammed by the lava flows overspilled said dams when heavy rainfall caused flooding, and the resulting cooling of the lava redirected the flow away from Clauster. Story 10. 3D printers. I recently got one, and the latest generations of printers just work out of the box. You press a few buttons, and a few hours later, you have a new thing made out of plastic just sitting there. It's like something out of a science fiction story, totally unreal. Story 11. If you wanted to visit our nearest neighbor galaxy, the Andromeda Galaxy, and you could drive at the speed of light, you would need to set out early, as it would take 25 million years, and that's without stopping for a toilet break. Story 12. If someone would have saved 8,000 every day for 245,000 years, he still wouldn't be as rich as Elon Musk right now. Story 13. The dry forest floor of Appalachia, amongst other places, is absolutely littered with shrimp eggs. Once a year, after the groundwater thaws and vernal pools appear, the shrimp hatch and reproduce, living only until the pools dry up. If you go out at night and shine a light into any given pool and wait 10 minutes or so, you'll see thousands. Very similar to sea monkeys, though not exactly the same. The Ohio River and Lake Erie are also home to tiny freshwater jellyfish that also only appear in their animal state to reproduce. Any other time, they just appear as little bits of goo attached to solid objects. Story 14. In the Atlantic, there's a spot called the underwater crop circles, where perfect circles form on the sand with insane geometric precision. The real reason is tiny pufferfish make them to attract females for mating. So yeah, mind-blowing shapes made by fish. Story 15. Just between Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, you can fit roughly around 1,220 Earths into them altogether. Keep this in mind. Line up all the planets in our solar system, and it doesn't equal the distance between the Earth and our moon. Even comfortably so when the moon is farthest from us. Space is mind-numbingly big, and I love that so much. Story 16. The blue whale is the largest creature to have ever existed. Suck it, dinosaurs. It is comparable to 30 T-Rex or 40 elephants. Story 17. Rich people can legally avoid all tax gains on capital assets by passing them on to their heirs, where the cost basis is reset on the inheritance. Rich guy buys house for 200 grows to 800 over 30 years. Kids inherit cost basis. Reset to 800. Kids can sell and pay no tax on the gains. Story 18. If you have held a properly shuffled deck of cards, it is likely that nobody has ever or will ever hold a deck of cards in that order. There are more ways to arrange a deck of cards than there are atoms on Earth. Answer. Every time you shuffle a deck of cards, the chances are that exact order has never existed before in the history of the universe. The number of possible shuffles is 52 factorial, that's an 8, followed by 67 zeros. To picture it, imagine setting a cosmic stopwatch to 52 factorial seconds and pressing start. Then begin walking around the Earth, but take one step every billion years. When you finally complete the lap, remove a single drop from the Pacific Ocean. Do it again and again until the ocean is empty. Then place one sheet of paper on the ground, refill the ocean, and start over. Repeat this process until the stack of paper reaches the sun, 93 million miles high. And when you're almost done, tear it all down and repeat the entire cycle 1,000 more times. And when you finally check that stopwatch, the number is so enormous it hasn't even dropped by a single digit. To make it run out, you have to repeat this process not once, not 1,000 times, but billions upon billions of times. That's how unimaginably big 52 factorial really is. Every time you shuffle a deck of cards, you are creating a unique sequence that has likely never existed in the entire history of the universe. The math behind it is so vast that every single shuffle is a distinct mathematical event. It's honestly mind-blowing to think that such a simple action involves astronomical odds every time you play. Story 19. Your brain can invent physical symptoms so real that doctors can't tell them apart from actual illness. Story 20. The rap duo Insane Clown Posse is the only professional wrestling tag team to have worked in ECW, WWF, WCW, TNA, ROH. They have also worked for many other promotions, with footage, Violent J's wrestling career going back to at least 1992. Which is before any Insane Clown Posse albums were released. He debuted on a show with a young Rob Van Dam, and they have been homies since. Shaggy retired due to injuries, but recently returned with a run-in at the Gathering of the Juggalos. During the GCW vs. JCW Bloody Mania main event, Violent J recently wrestling in Japan and appearing in Mexico for AAA NWA GCMLW also had Jay in matches. He also won the WrestleCade Battle Royal in 2023. Story 21. If you properly shuffle a deck of cards, that it's probably the only time in history that order has come up before, and it probably won't come up again anytime soon. Story 22. We're further from WW2 than German unification before the war was. Alternatively, Liberia had a general election in 1929, where the true Whig Party got 240, 0 votes. This was odd given the less than 20, 0 registered voters. Story 23. The country with the most time zones is France. Copper and gold can be endlessly melted down and reused, and therefore recycled without any loss of quality. Which means, depending on the historic copper trade within your country, there is a minute possibility that your home electrics or plumbing contain the exact same copper that Ia Nasser sold to Nanny. Story 24. Everything about the platypus. No matter how many weird things you know about the platypus, there is always another ridiculous fact you don't yet know. Story 25. Sharks existed before trees. Sharks appeared around 400 million years ago, while the first trees showed up about 350 million years ago. Story 26. The Insane Clown Posse runs a moderately successful annual music festival, the Gathering of the Juggalos, which is the longest-running independent rap festival in the world. Story 27. The Nobel Prize for Medicine was once awarded to a doctor who deliberately infected syphilis patients with malaria. Syphilis was untreatable at the time, but it was known that a high fever early enough in infection could eliminate it. Malaria would bring one. While also incurable, the patient could treat the malaria with quinine and live a comfortable life. This treatment would become a curiosity in a decade or so, after the discovery of penicillin, a much less invasive cure for syphilis. Story 28. Before a certain fungi came into existence, the world was covered in fallen trees, miles deep, which eventually crushed together to form coal. Answer. This is a pop science factoid that is not based in reality. Lignin was only a small component of early trees, is only one component of coal deposits, and there is evidence of lignin decay fungi present in coal seams. Coal also formed in large deposits well after this proposed time period of evolution of fungi. The cause of coal seams is far more likely attributed to the paleogeology and climate of the time. During the period of Pangea, the planet was covered in vast swamps and peat bogs. When plant matter dies and falls into a peatland, it can't decay due to the anaerobic conditions, which still happens today, just not at the same rate. The idea that all trees on the planet could not decay for millions of years is ludicrous and would have disrupted carbon cycles in unfathomable ways. It is fascinating how certain scientific facts can turn out to be nothing more than popular myths. The idea that coal exists because ancient fungi were too lazy to eat trees is a great story, but the truth about climate shifts and massive swamps is much more complex. It's a perfect reminder that we should always look a little deeper than the first fun fact we hear. Story 29. There is a shark called a cookie cutter shark. Cookie cutter sharks are not strong swimmers and instead use daily vertical migrations as their primary method of traveling to eat. They travel up to 3 kilometers, 1.9 miles, each way between deep and shallow waters every night to feed. Story 30. That some countries just freeze your bank account and you can't touch your own money for weeks or months. I thought this is movie stuff until I read real stories from people. Once you see few of those, it stops sounding crazy. Still hard to believe it's legal in some places. Story 31. Complete list of all-time total receiving yards for players. 40 or older in the NFL home phone. Jerry Rice, 2, 169 receiving yards. Tom Brady, 6 receiving yards. Mercedes Lewis, 2 receiving yards. Everyone not explicitly named, 0 yards. Brett Favre, 2 receiving yards. Story 32. NASA and several other major powers have landed on the moon. The Earth is not flat. Global warming is real. Vaccines do not cause autism. Story 33. Turritopsis dohrnii, the immortal jellyfish, avoid passing by reversing their life cycle from mature back to a juvenile stage. Story 34. Snuck isn't technically a word, but an eventually adopted colloquialism. I remember being a kid and it would set the spell check off. Sometimes the past form to sneak is sneaked. Story 35. Juggalos, or fans of the Insane Clown Posse, a duo of horror comedy rappers and also professional wrestling tag team, are the only musical fan base in history to be labeled a gang by the U.S. government. Story 36. Cleopatra lived closer in time to the moon landing than to the construction of the Great Pyramid. The pyramid is just that ancient. Story 37. 109 billion people have lived and died so far on Earth since the emergence of humans. Current 8 billion people are excluded. Story 38. At 288 miles, Michigan has the longest freshwater coastline in the world. Remove the freshwater modifier, and our state has the second longest total shoreline, after Alaska. Story 39. During the Prohibition era of the U.S., some doctors became glorified bartenders because prescriptions were basically the only way to legally acquire adult beverage. Story 40. I got one that I think is true. When you park at a big store, there will be someone sitting in their car or leaving or pulling into a spot within 3 spaces from you. Story 41. If every person on Earth was given a deck of cards and they shuffled it once every minute, nonstop, it would take over 1 trillion years before one deck matched a previous deck. Story 42. Webcasting spiders have such incredible night vision that the sun's UV rays literally melts their eyeballs because they don't have irises. They regenerate at dusk. Wiki article. Story 43. More time between Allosaurus and T-Rex than T-Rex and humans. In addition, T-Rex is more closely related to birds than Allosaurus. Story 44. Cleopatra was born closer to the building of the iPhone than to the building of the Great Pyramids. The Great Pyramids were built sometime around 2600, 2500 BC, and she was born around 70 BC. Story 45. Pollution from coal power generation eliminate more people every day than every nuclear power accident in history. Story 46. The water on Earth today is the same water from the Jurassic period. It's in a constant recycle loop. Answer, yes, but also no. It depends on your definition of the same. Certainly most of the molecules are the same and just recycled, but some will have been split apart by things like lightning and new ones formed from various combustion and biological processes. Even if you mean the atoms in the molecules, a tiny proportion will have been lost out of the atmosphere while others have arrived from space. Story 47. I love stuff like this. For me, it's how some people can remember exact details from years ago, like it just happened. Anyone else have weird, real things like that? Story 48. The first collages that formed Oxford University were started before the beginning of the Aztec Empire. Story 49. You are star stuff. Almost off of your atoms were created when big stars went supernova. The atoms drifted through space and became us, skipping a few minor steps in between. Story 1. They use reflective paint on reindeer antlers in Finland to prevent drivers from hitting them in the long, dark, icy winters. Story 50. Thomas Midgley Jr. invented both leaded petrol and CFCs, 2 of the 20th century's most environmentally harmful innovations. Story 51. That Donald Trump won presidency and his only candidate was Hillary Clinton. Not political. It's just bizarre. Those were our options in a country of brilliant people who would have been amazing candidates. Story 52. The present does not exist. The time you read this and processes it in your brain, it is already in the past. Story 53. George Washington died in 1799. The first identified fossilized dinosaur remains were discovered around 1815. George Washington never knew about dinosaurs. Story 54. That in the 1880s, 1890s, there was a baboon named Jack that worked for the Australian Railroad as a signal operator. He worked for them for 12 years and is said to never have made a mistake. Story 55. The dinosaurs were all dead before grass existed. The dinosaurs were eliminated off 65 million years ago, while grass evolved 55 million years ago. Story 56. There is a Greenlandic shark that is rumored to have been born before Shakespeare was, and that shark is still alive to this day. Story 57. Male honeybees, drones, have grandfathers, but they do not have fathers. Crazy, but 100 true. I can elaborate if you want. LOL. Story 58. The Isle of Scilly, pronounced silly, and Netherlands are not sure if they have been at war for 300 years, so they signed a peace treaty recently just to make sure. Story 59. If you were born after 1950, every single banana you have ever eaten has been genetically identical. Edit. Apparently this is wrong the more you learn. So to keep with the theme of bananas, the reason artificial banana flavor doesn't taste like bananas, at least the ones most folks are used to, is because it replicates the flavor of the Gros Michel banana, the predecessor to the Cavendish, nearly rendered extinct by a fungus. Answer, that's not a fact, because there are several varieties of bananas available in India that are different and some wild species and not the popular Cavendish variety. Here is the Sun Kelly, aka a lychee banana, is a variety. It's harder, sweeter, less flavorful, smaller in size, slightly longer than your index finger, sometimes contains seeds. Blue banana, red banana, wild banana, etc. I have eaten them all, and they are not the typical tissue culture bee clones of Cavendish you are referring to. Story 60. You can see something on the internet that you disagree with or that offends you without having to let people know you disagree with it or that it offends you. Story 61. You ever notice that things that banana flavor don't quite taste like what you think bananas taste like? That's because the flavoring is based off of the Gros Michel banana that actually went extinct in 1965. The bananas we are accustomed to now are Cavendish bananas, which taste different. Story 62. Amazon started off as an online bookstore. The crime rate in the Netherlands is so low, they have to ship in inmates so the guards don't lose their jobs. It takes 30 cows to supply enough leather to supply the NFL for 1 year. Antarctica holds the 90 of the world's freshest water. I got dozens of these. Story 63. Canada maintains a strategic reserve of maple syrup for significant financial reasons, which can lead to some fun capers. Story 64. Though Everest has the highest altitude, it is not the closest to space. Because the Earth is shaped like a beach ball that someone is sitting on, I believe a mountain in South America is actually nearer to space than the top of Everest. Story 65. Mark Hamill starred in a movie in 1977. It was his first theatrically released film. It wasn't Star Wars. Story 66. The only way to ensure a person can be an organ donor is to keep them alive. Continue CPR after they're dead, brain dead or equivalent. Or Story 67. A pizza guy in Detroit invented modern bulletproof vests because he was tired of getting shot at and robbed while on deliveries. Story 68. There is a metal alloy called Invar, which is a metal alloy of iron and nickel. The interesting thing is that there is a very specific amount of nickel, which makes the alloy experience virtually no thermal expansion when it heats up. Any more nickel or any less, then it completely falls apart. It's about 35 nickel, and we have no idea why this is the magic amount as far as I'm aware. Story 69. Your brain predicts what you are about to experience before you actually experience it by an infinitesimal amount of time. Our vision, in fact, runs 100 milliseconds behind the real world. So our evolution has adapted our brain to predict what is about to happen before we actually see it happen. And it is usually right, but not always. Hence, our entire reality that we experience is actually a story that our brain creates of the real world, and not in fact an experience of the real world. Weird neuroscience stuff. Answer. I notice this with age, particularly with reading. My brain predicts words based on past experience, and sometimes provides similar words that almost but not quite make sense. I think it is also true in accidents involving older people. We get so used to our environment being a certain way that we don't quite see the difference between our brain's prediction and what is actually happening. Story 70. Einstein taught us that mass and energy are the exact same thing, just in different forms. To be fair, the added mass is extremely tiny, but it is there, it is true and measurable. The next mind-blowing thing Einstein taught us is that time and space are one thing. If you move more distance in space, you can't be moving through time so much. And if you move through time, you can't make a lot of distance in space. In other words, if you are fast, your wristwatch will tick slower than if you are slow. This is important for navigation satellites, for example. Story 71. When you get a kidney transplant, they usually just leave your original kidneys in your body and put the 3-year-old kidney in your pelvis. Story 72. There are almost certainly an infinite number of exact copies of you, Earth, the solar system, the Milky Way, etc. in the universe. The universe is assumed to be both infinite and normal. One property of infinite and normal things, strings for example, is that any substring in it will appear elsewhere an infinite number of times. You are a subset of the universe, therefore you appear elsewhere. Story 73. Your feet are very slightly younger than your head. Time moves slower around massive gravitation bodies. This is often illustrated in the example of a slight time offset inherent in GPS satellites to maintain accuracy because their clocks in orbit are running at a faster rate, like 1/1000th of a second or something, but it's enough to throw them off by several miles per day, if not corrected for. The same is true, albeit to an even smaller margin, to your own body. Story 74. If you can fit all the planets of the solar system, side by side, they would fit between the Earth and the Moon. Story 75. The deadliest creature to humankind on the planet Earth is the mosquito, and it has been that way for as long as we have been Homo sapiens. Story 76. Australia had a prime minister that went swimming in the ocean and then just disappeared. We still don't know what actually happened to him. Also, we lost a war against emus, and there's an unconfirmed rumor, I think, that our current prime minister took a poo in a McDonald's. Edit. I should have been a bit clearer about this. He did a poo in his pants while he was still wearing them. We have a weird history. Story 77. If Dr. Martin Luther King and Anne Frank were alive today, they'd both be the same age as Barbara Walters. Story 78. Atropa belladonna, aka deadly nightshade and beautiful lady, was previously used by women in Venice during ancient times to make their pupil size dilated in order to look more attractive for the men. It's now used as medicinal purposes to cause dilation of the pupils by blocking a specific nerve receptor, and it's also classified as a poison. Story 79. You have never technically actually seen yourself in real life. You see parts of yourself and only see full versions of you through reflections, pictures, or videos. Story 80. There are more ways to shuffle a deck of cards than there are atoms in the Milky Way. Every time you shuffle a deck, it is almost certain that order of cards has never been seen before and will never be seen ever again. Story 81. If you take a tree and uproot it, then take all the leaves off of the tree limbs and plant the limbs down in the ground. The original roots will grow leaves and the old limbs will become the roots. Story 82. The guy who used to host the TV show The Apprentice was elected president of the United States at one point. Story 83. There are flowers and single-celled organisms that are genetically more complex than humans and most animals. Every organism has a lot of junk DNA, as in DNA that is not actively being used in the current phenotype. Story 84. Bananas or berries? Don't believe me? Look it up. My mom and I argued out it for 3 hours till she did. I was right. Story 85. When you eat a pineapple, it also eats you. To explain it somewhat simply, the juices of a pineapple contain an enzyme of sorts named bromelain that digests proteins, so that sour taste and weird feeling you get when eating pineapple is actually the taste of that enzyme and it digesting your tongue. The juices aren't nearly as acidic as stomach acid, so after swallowing, they lose their acidity and just get digested and processed. They also lose their acidity when heavily processed artificially, hence why drinking store-bought pineapple juice doesn't melt your mouth away. Edited to add correct information and fix typos. Nature has a very strange sense of humor when it comes to our food. When you eat a pineapple, it is technically eating you back because the enzyme bromelain is actively breaking down the proteins in your mouth. It's one of the few snacks in the world that actually fights back while you're enjoying it, which makes every bite a bit of a duel. Story 86. Maned wolves are not wolves. Mountain goats are not goats. Electric eels are not eels. King cobras are not cobras. Horned toads are not toads. Peacock mantis shrimp are not peacocks, not mantises, and not shrimp. Story 87. The first known use of the word fudge was in a legal document as part of a fake last name given to the defendant, literally as an insult because people dislike him so much. Story 88. If you add big amount of sodium to water, it may explode, and it sounds fake because there is sodium in salt, but it's true. Story 89. When the Apollo 11 astronauts returned from the moon, they had to go through customs and formally declare the importation of lunar material into the United States. Story 90. A class of fungus known as mycorrhizae can infect the roots of plants, leaching away the sugars created by the plants, but in return giving them access to more nutrients. As the fungus can spread much further than the roots of the plant, the fungus can actually connect two plants together, allowing them to share nutrients and communicate with each other, warning of invading insects or pathogens, so the other plants can prepare defenses, for example, in an underground network of sorts. Story 91. I'm going to say this once again because people didn't believe me the first time and didn't even try to check if it was true. Your forearm is the same size as your feet. I know you've just looked at it and you're thinking that there is no way, but just sit down and overlay them. They are the same length. Story 92. Every week someone posts this to go karma and upvotes. Meanwhile, other good questions get destroyed in limbo. Story 93. We have lost the original videotape of Apollo 11. What we see is a camera recording a TV because the process for sending image from the moon to the Earth was not compatible with TV channels. And after the mission, they forgot to check the video tape, so someone probably deleted accidentally what was on it to put a TV show or something. Story 94. Turtles are increasingly stupid, and if you leave a bucket near them, they will try to make babies with it, and they also do this with extra curvy boulders. Story 95. Trees communicate with each other via pheromones, instant signals, as well as other methods. They use this to warn each other about drought, disease, and to share memes. Story 96. The grandson of former President John Tyler, born 1790, is still alive. Here's a picture comparing John Tyler and his grandson, Harrison Ruffin Tyler. Story 97. America is named after a man who sold pickles. His name was Amerigo Vespucci, nicknamed the Pickle Merchant. Story 98. The old leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-il, has a biography that talks about all of his achievements. Some of these achievements include being able to control weather, never needing to poop during his lifetime, and inventing the hamburger. Story 99. Trees existed for thousands of years before organisms existed that could break down dead trees. So for thousands of years, when trees would die, they would just lay there. In fact, some believe this is where all coal came from, not dinosaurs. Story 100. There's a coal mine fire in Pennsylvania that started in the 1960s that is still burning to this day. Story 101. Way too late, but I need to say this. Every time you shuffle a deck of cards, that particular arrangement is brand new, and it is the first time the cards have ever been sorted in that order in human history. Story 102. Two of them. One, El Paso, Texas is closer to Los Angeles, California than it is to Houston, Texas. Two, there are more bones in a cat's tail than in the human hand. Story 103. Michael Jordan was the general manager of the Wizards, drafted a player, couldn't stand him complaining, so he became a player for the Wizards to play with him. Story 104. Kurt Cobain was only a year younger than Rick Astley. The first Star Wars movie, A New Hope, came out only 2 years after the Vietnam War ended. There were people born in the 19th century that were still alive in 2017-2018. Story 105. The only way to lose weight is by being in a calorie deficit. Every diet that works is just a calorie deficit. Story 106. Probably buried, but there is a 100-acre forest in Utah that's just one giant tree. Short version, it's a single colony of tree that has a massive root system that's estimated to be thousands of years old. Story 107. You could fit every planet from the solar system in between the moon and the Earth and still have some space left. Story 108. After being suspected of eating a toddler, he was ejected from the hospital. Next time I'm having a bad day, I will look back on this and just be thankful that I've never been so hungry that I had to resort to eating corpses and children. Story 109. The first part of our bodies that form are the jerk and the mouth, and then everything else grows in between them. We are a type of organism called a deuterostome, meaning two openings. Story 110. There is a type of fungus called O. unilateralis that infects insects, mostly ants, and controls their brains. Story 111. Honey badger's skin is tough enough to resist several machete blows and is almost impervious to arrows and spears. Story 112. Cow farts are one of the easiest ways an alien species could detect life on Earth from across the galaxy. Story 113. There was a Korean guy fighting with the Wehrmacht in Normandy who was captured by the Americans on D-Day. Turned out he had been conscripted into the Imperial Japanese Army some years before, then captured by the Red Army. After some time as a POW, was conscripted into the Red Army, then captured by the Germans. After some time as a well, you get the picture. Cannot remember his name, but I think there's a movie about him from about 10 years ago. Story 114. Charlie Chaplin outlived Elvis Presley. It's amazing how many people think Chaplin died in the black and white film era. Answer, on a similar note, what do Anne Frank, MLK Jr., and Barbara Walters have in common? They were born the same year. Things many view as history were lived experiences by people alive today. The first African-American children to go to desegregated schools in the South are the same age or younger than most Redditors' grandparents. Many of our parents are the same age. Story 115. I once won a game of Trivial Pursuit because I knew this. General Feldmarschall Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher believed himself to be pregnant with an elephant fathered by a French infantryman. Answer. It appears that this interpretation is based on misunderstanding of Blücher's German. I recall reading, and can try to trace the source if wanted, that being pregnant with an elephant by an X was a way of saying in Berlin vernacular that this X was giving a person headache. IOW, what Blücher meant was something like, those darn French are causing me trouble. Miko H. 1922, 16 October, 2006 UTC. Story 116. France last used the guillotine in 1977. I assume they stopped using it after the French Revolution. C'est ma faute. Answer, the guillotine is actually one of the most humane methods of execution. We use the methods we do in the modern day because they look better to the viewers. Lethal injection can cause extreme pain, even when done correctly. Gas is also extremely painful, and the electric chair is just hell on earth. The most humane way to execute someone is from close range with a large caliber handgun or shotgun to the lower back of the skull. Passing is much quicker. Story 170. If you enter the Panama Canal from the Pacific side, the west coast, you will exit in the Caribbean west of where you entered. The canal runs the W to SE, where the isthmus is running slightly SW to NE. Story 118. 1. British looted $45 trillion from India. They even scraped out every bit of stones in temples and monuments. 2. Khilji, a Mughal ruler, set Nalanda University in India on fire because an Indian man knew more than the doctors in his court. The building was on fire for 3 months. There were approximately more than 9 million manuscripts in the Great Library. Story 119. Mantis shrimp strike their prey so quickly, with speed up to 50 on and acceleration up to 10,400, that it generates cavitation bubbles between their claw and the surface of the prey. The prey is hit twice, first by the claw at a force of 1,500 newtons, and second by the collapse of the cavitation bubbles, which produces a shockwave strong enough to stun or eliminate much larger prey than the shrimp itself. They can crack aquarium glass and split open a human thumb. Edit accuracy. Answer, I did a little more reading, and here are some other fun facts. Some species of mantis shrimp are rainbow-colored and mind-bogglingly beautiful. Humans have 3 types of color-receptive cone cells in our eyes that allow us to see all the colors we do. Mantis shrimps have 16 types of color-receptive cone cells and are able to see both UV and polarized light. The force of the collapsing cavitation bubbles produces temperatures of several thousand kelvins and also emits tiny bursts of light called sonoluminescence. Finally, here is a video of an unfortunate dude getting punched in the foot by a pissed-off mantis shrimp. The mantis shrimp is essentially a real-life superhero with a terrifying power. It strikes with the speed and force of a bullet, creating bubbles so hot they briefly reach the temperature of the sun. It's a beautiful rainbow-colored underwater assassin, and it's a good thing they aren't any bigger, or we might not be the ones at the top of the food chain. Story 120. The Pacific Ocean is so large that there is a point where you could tunnel straight through the Earth, and when you come out the other end, you are still in the Pacific Ocean. Also, there is, at all times, a pair of points on opposite sides of the Earth where both the temperature and air pressure are the same, and this is true for any 2 continuous variables. Story 121. The moon is precisely 400x smaller than the sun, and on average is also precisely 400x closer, giving both the same apparent size from Earth. In a similar vein, the moon rotates basically every 28 days, and also orbits the Earth every 28 days. So we basically see the same side anytime it is visible. Moon facts. Story 122. If you live in Seattle, WA, you are closer to outer space than you are to the Canadian border. 100 miles to Canada, 70 miles to outer space. Kármán line. Story 123. World War I was started because a man went to console himself with his favorite sandwich after failing to eliminate Franz Ferdinand. And Franz Ferdinand's car broke down immediately outside the sandwich shop as the failed assassin was leaving with his sandwich, still armed. Story 124. The pyramids of Egypt weren't built by slaves or aliens. They were built by construction workers who were paid in beef and beer. Story 125. If you can't escape, the best way to fend of a black bear is to try beating the ever-living shoot out of it. Story 126. About 30 of the mass of soil, that's good healthy soil, is fungus. Dead and alive fungus. I don't know about you, but I find that kind of awesome. Story 127. There are more bacterial cells than human cells in your body. There are more water molecules in a glass of water than there are glasses of water in all the oceans. The density of the gas you breathe in affects the pitch, if your voice. Low-density gases, helium, make your voice high-pitched, but high-density gases make your voice lower-pitched. This is due to the way the sound waves travel through gases of different densities. Story 128. IDK. If I posted this comment in another thread, but whatever. In 2015, an Australian English-speaking man got into a car accident which left him in a coma for a week. When he woke up, he spoke Mandarin fluently. He went on to star in Chinese TV shows and other stuff. Story 129. Ice for gin and tonics for the British colonial rulers of India was shipped by rail and then sailboat after being harvested from the frozen lakes of Minnesota. Story 130. There are only 25 blimps in the entire world. Of those, only about half are actually in operation right now, and they are almost exclusively within the United States. There are currently more astronauts than there are blimp pilots. Story 131. In Madagascar, there lives a species of moth that feeds, ETA almost, exclusively on the tears of sleeping birds. Story 132. The guy who did the autopsy on Albert Einstein kept his brain in 3 mason jars. One day, a Japanese guy located the guy and obtained a slice to take home to Japan. Story 133. At the time foundations of the Great Pyramid were made, the North Star was Thuban. Today, the North Star is Polaris. Story 134. The band Great White was, and may still be, more likely to be responsible for passing in humans than their namesake. Rated in Revolver in 2005 or 6, it was a really dark observation. Answer, yep, I'm from the area and it was horrific. My aunt and her husband were supposed to go to the show at the station that night, but ended up not going for whatever reason. This most likely saved their lives. Most people who went to the show died simply because they wouldn't let people use a different exit when the fire broke out. This caused everyone to flood to the main entrance and get trapped, slowly burning to passing while everyone outside watched in horror. There's videos of people screaming in pain and begging for help from that night. Truly horrible. Story 135. Evil Knievel got his nickname because he was in jail, maybe just a tipsy tank, I can't remember, with a regular called forename Nawful. The guards referred to him as Awful Nawful, and so Knievel decided if he's Awful Nawful, then I must be Evil Knievel. Story 136. For a time, the number of people who drowned by falling in a pool correlated with films that featured Nicolas Cage. Story 137. Even though the body of a caterpillar is almost completely dissolved during metamorphosis, the insect still recognizes toxic plants as a butterfly. Story 138. Of Americans who drink Coca-Cola, somewhere around 50 of the population, they drink on average 4 cans of Coca-Cola a day. Story 139. The first humans didn't arrive in Madagascar from the African mainland, but from the Malay archipelago across the Indian Ocean. To this day, Madagascans speak Malagasy, an Austronesian language. Story 140. With the way time feels faster as you get older, your birth to 14 feels the same length of time as 15 to 75. Story 141. Sea unicorns are a real thing. There are actually animals that look like seals with 10-foot-long tusks. I was 37 years old when I found out narwhals are actually real. Story 142. I get downvoted every time I answer this, but There are more trees on Earth than stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Story 143. I'm 40 years old and have over 800 in my retirement fund. I only make $60K a year and only work 8 months a year. Story 144. Jalapenos were not originally spicy, but they became spicy as a defense mechanism against humans. But all that did was make it worse for them. Story 145. Berry Gordy Jr., the Motown record executive, and Jimmy Carter, the 39th president of the United States, are second cousins. Story 146. India, Brazil, China. You had approximately 12 chance of being born in these 3 places and other 12 chance to be born in one of the 192 other countries. Story 147. Guns don't make any sound. The gunpowder exploding is what you can hear. The gun itself only makes an almost inaudible sound of the firing pin clicking into place. Story 148. Scientists suggest that the ring of Saturn is 1 million years old, and shark species as a whole is 400 million years old. That means the species of sharks is older than the ring of Saturn. Story 149. I don't mean to sound like a jerk, but I've met people younger than me who look at least 15 years older than me. I don't understand it at all. Story 150. The Japan's body pillows seen today were actually invented by Dutch soldiers serving in Japan who missed their wives. They started out as woven hay and scrap fabrics. Story 151. Horses evolved in North America, spread to Asia, then went extinct in North America, and were reintroduced by European settlers. Story 152. There is a phenomenon that allows for an object to be locked in position in midair, pinned in space. See quantum locking, flux pinning, and the Meissner effect. Story 153. Chest freezers are significantly more efficient than standard upright opening freezers and fridges. This is because when you open up a normal, vertical standing fridge freezer, all the cold air falls out. Story 154. The Taser stands for Thomas A. Swift Electric Rifle. The name was inspired by books about an inventor called Tom Swift, who made amazing gadgets. The inventor of the Taser, Jack Cover, loved these books as a child. Story 155. All of the planets in the solar system, lined end to end, can fit in the space between the Earth and Moon. Story 156. Babies are born without their kneecaps and develop them only a few months. I think a few months it was after they have been born. Story 157. There are more combinations for a deck of cards than there are molecules in the observable universe. Story 158. There was a bear, that's right, a bear that became an officially registered member of the Polish army in the 1940s. His name was Wojtek, or Wojtek, can't remember the spelling. He's the only bear I know of that went to war. Story 159. Doesn't sound fake, but vaccines save lives, that's all I can say. We literally eradicated polio because of vaccines. Rabies is no longer a threat now, as it has a very high mortality rate. Get vaccinated ASAP. Story 160. When I was 13, I started an anti-pineapple cult on Vancher, and the cult is still a thing to this day somehow. Story 161. Giraffes give birth standing up, so the first thing a baby giraffe experiences when it's born is a 6-foot drop to the ground. Story 162. Hobbits, or Homo floresiensis, existed until around 0 years ago. They were native to Indonesia and stood around 4th Michelle Jackson was a JW and voluntarily, practically the equivalent of defellowshipping, left after Thriller pissed off the Watchtower. Story 163. Tomorrow Island and Yesterday Island are separated by 4 miles, 8 kilometers, but separated by 21 hours. Story 164. There was a war against emus in my country, and we lost the war. We lost the war against giant birds. Just sad. Story 165. For all you fans of the late 90s Yankees, do you know what the German word for garlic is? Knoblauch. Story 166. When my eldest son was a teenager, he was capable of spending 30 minutes making up excuses and explaining why he didn't have time to do something that would have taken 10 minutes to complete. In his mind, this made sense. Story 167. Pablo Picasso was in fact not a Renaissance artist, but died in 1973. Half the people I know think he died in like the 1600s. Story 168. YouTube started as a dating site, but since so many people used it to share videos of their pets, they just went with it and made it into what it is today. Story 169. The world's biggest cashew tree is located in Brazil, and it covers an area of approximately 8,500 mm, 3,281.34 square. It has a few branches that touch the ground and form new roots. The tree is over 100, and it's still growing. It's starting to overrun one of the main road. They are scared the plant might die if they try to cut it, the part overrunning the road, cause it has such weird behavior and two anomalies. Story 170. The ancient pyramids were as ancient to the ancient Egyptians as the ancient Egyptians are to us. Just let that sink in. Story 171. Acquisition. Theoretically, if an alien living on a planet 200 million light years away had a device by which they could view Earth due to the 200 light years gap in light reach, instead of seeing humans through the device, aliens would instead see dinosaurs from the Jurassic period, since that's the era from which the light has reached till that point. Story 172. That a lightning can strike upwards. Before yesterday, I always had thought it only goes from a cloud to the ground, and not vice versa. Story 173. That the manufacturer of McDonald's McFlurry machines, Taylor, has been running a repair racket for years, bugging their machines with malicious code, keeping franchises in constant need of their monopoly on repairs. A small firm called Kitsch developed a device that can diagnose and debug the machines. The two companies are now in court after Kitsch filed a restraining order following numerous attempts to purchase machines directly through lawyers, franchisees, and using aliases. Story 174. Mark Zuckerberg contains 0 robotic cyborg parts, although I bet someone makes whirring noises whenever he turns his head in a meeting. Story 175. There's a family of birds where males spends their entire lives practicing insanely intricate courting dances. Just ridiculously complicated. Swan Lake level complicated. They're called birds of paradise, and they've faced pretty much no predation or outside environmental pressures for the majority of their existence. Basically, their every need has been taken care of. So, the females have been the ones to instill the evolutionary pressure. They still wanted to be selective in choosing their mate in order to raise the best possible offspring. And the males still wanted to show they were worthy, so they kind of made up their own standards that somehow ended up building up into just a huge complicated mess. One of my favorites is a bird that has a chosen dance floor on the forest floor that it cleans every day. It moves all the leaves and sticks and shoot that fell the night before until it's just bare dirt, and it practices its moves all day every day until a female comes along. Then it proceeds through a courting dance with 4 distinct parts in a very exact order, each part having a complex series of movements. These dances can last anywhere from 20 minutes to hours on end, and the majority of the time the female doesn't even stay for the whole thing. When they do succeed, it's a 10-second tops insemination and the female's on her way. And then the male just goes back to practicing for the next female. Just insane. You really have to respect the incredible hustle of these birds. Spending years practicing an elaborate dance routine for a performance that only lasts a few seconds is a level of dedication that is hard to fathom. Next time you feel like your dating life is a struggle, just remember you don't have to choreograph a professional light show in the jungle to get a date. Story 176. Bananas are berries, strawberries and blackberries aren't. Pineapples take 2 years to grow, sharks predate trees. Cleopatra lived closer to the release of the first iPhone than she did the building of the pyramids of Giza. Story 177. Sloths can starve to passing on a full stomach. It has to do with the enzymes microbes in their stomach that doesn't allow them to digest properly. So they basically have food just sitting there in their belly. Story 178. There are a lot of moths, 200-300 described species, that don't have a digestive system. They have all the fats they get before their change. They breed, then starve to passing. Since the mouth parts of adult saturniids are vestigial and digestive tracts are absent, adults subsist on stored lipids acquired during the larval stage. Story 179. The average person eats X spiders in their sleep factoid not only isn't true, it originated in a book as an example of a bullshit lie that people would believe without fact-checking. Story 180. The pyramids were formed 400-500 years ago. Chernobyl won't be habitable again for 0 years. Consider how much has changed between the pyramids being built and now. Then multiple that by 6. Mind-boggling. Story 181. More than half of the world population and as much as 75 of USA wear some kind of vision correction. Glasses, contact lenses, etc. Story 182. Male clownfish become females if no females exist within the home of that clownfish. The process can take years. Story 183. The human race has photographed light moving. A team of college students built a camera that could film so fast, over 3 trillion frames per second, that it could capture light moving. Story 184. The drive from San Diego, CA to El Paso, TX is not as far as the drive from El Paso, TX to Houston. Story 185. My father grew up down the street from Janis Joplin, and they were close friends. In high school, he was on the football team, and their captain was bullying Joplin. He ended up trying to bring the peace between them, and the three ended up becoming close friends. That team captain was Jimmy Johnson. They graduated together, and Joplin met in early passing, but my dad was friends with Johnson until my dad's passing in 2012. Story 186. Now at this exact moment as you read this, you are oldest than you have ever been and youngest that you will ever be. Story 180. And still my 4 separate security cameras that had faces and a visible license plate never amounted to anything regarding my brand fudge new Kawasaki HDWoo that was stolen. Story 188. That on May 5th, 1945, American soldiers defended an abandoned POW camp from being retaken by the SS. That camp was actually a medieval castle. The POWs were members of France's high society, and fighting alongside them both was the German Wehrmacht. Story 189. That banana flavoring tastes different to bananas because it was based on a banana that went practically extinct. Sounds made up. Totally true. Story 190. Every standard deck of cards you shuffle well will likely result in completely unique order of cards that has never before existed. Ever. Story 191. Sperm whales are one of the loudest animals on Earth, which has a 230 decibels, and airplanes are 150 decibels from takeoff, and doctors used to do surgery on infants without anesthesia, but was stopped in late 90s. Story 192. When you get a liver transplant, or transplants like that, your body sees it as foreign and so attacks it. The doctors counteract this by weakening your immune system so that it doesn't eliminate the new organ. Story 193. The number one predator of moose are killer whales. Moose will dive up to 20 feet to feed on underwater vegetation. Sometimes a killer whale finds them when they do. Story 194. According to Coca-Cola, only 2 people know the recipe to Coca-Cola, and they are never allowed to hop aboard the same plane in case it crashes. Story 195. AW released a failed competitor to McDonald's Quarter Pounder called the Third Pounder. It was a better deal in every way. It was efficient to produce, and the only reason it failed was because people thought the Quarter Pounder was bigger. It failed because not enough people knew basic fractions. Story 196. Just saw the Greek mythology argument. It wouldn't be out of the question for Zeus to revert to bestially. All the gods were inbred, and Zeus' son's wife was the reason the Minotaur was created. Google it. Story 197. California alone consumes over 250 million pounds of pork a month. Let's break that down a bit. That's just over 2 million pigs a month, 70 pigs a day, 3 pigs an hour, 50 pigs a minute. Story 198. Ukraina Polish means borderlands, but Ukrajina Ukrainian means homeland. And yes, these 2 words also mean Ukraine. Story 199. London is actually a forest. 20 of London is covered with trees, therefore technically classing it as forest. Story 200. I learned in biology class that if you have a gene turned one way, licorice tastes sweet, and if it's turned the other way, it tastes bitter. Story 201. The golden age of piracy began in the aftermath of the War of the Spanish Succession, which was caused by the Spanish Habsburg dynasty going extinct due to inbreeding. So in other words, we have the cousin fudge Habsburgs to thank for Pirates of the Caribbean. Story 202. In 1970s, scientists confirmed Chernobyl was safe. Chernobyl in this case means wormwood. It was believed that wormwood drove people mad. The city of Chernobyl is named after the surrounding wormwood forests. Story 203. The German Empire once used a 65-meter, 213 feet long submarine to run the British blockade and succeeded both leaving and re-entering Germany. This was in 1916-17. This thing is huge, and it went underwater and came back up when telephones were a new thing. Story 204. The largest air force in the world is the U.S. Air Force. The second largest air force in the world is the U.S. Navy. Story 205. Cordyceps, which is the fungus that infects people in the game, The Last of Us, is actually real but can only infect plants and not humans, since it hasn't evolved to infect humans yet. Story 206. A sandwich is named after the Earl of Sandwich, who wanted some non-sticky food he could eat while playing cards. Story 207. Penguins shoot with the fastest force out of all the animals on the planet, because if they shat any slower, they would lose internal body heat. Story 208. I have two. One, Cleopatra Stephen, the Cleopatra, was born closer to the invention of the iPhone than to the construction of the Great Pyramids. 2. Mansa Musa of Mali was the wealthiest man in human history. He was so rich, when he went on a pilgrimage to Mecca, he spent so much gold on the way there, he actually caused rapid hyperinflation of basic goods because he devalued gold so severely, he actually had to buy the gold back at an increased rate in order to stabilize the entire regional economy. Story 209. That a weird rich guy who had a private FK island staffed with underage girls for some reason had a painting of a president in a dress in the entrance to his home. Story 210. Lemons are not naturally occurring. Humans created them as a hybrid of bitter orange and citron. Cleopatra lived closer to the release of the iPhone than she did to the creation of the pyramids of Giza. Pyramids built 2600 BC. Cleopatra alive from 69 BC to 30 BC. iPhone released in 2007. Mosquitoes are responsible for half of all human deaths. About 108 billion humans have existed. Mosquitoes are thought to have eliminated about 54 billion. Story 211. The theory of relativity. That shoot blows my mind every time. The faster you go, the slower time travels. So if you are going the speed of light, you won't age. Story 212. At the time I am writing this, it is 3:20 a.m. on August 13, 2021. Cleopatra, the famous one at least, lived closer to the writing of this comment than she did the building of the pyramids. Story 213. Samurai were officially abolished in Japan in 1867. The first ever fax machine was invented in 1843. Abraham Lincoln died in 1865. So, there was a 22-year window where the samurai technically could have sent a fax to Alien. Also that when doctors finish surgery, they put the organs back in your body, and your organs just automatically know where to go, from like a muscle memory type of thing, and wriggle back to the correct spot. Story 214. That if you knock your tooth out and put it back in the socket, it will grow roots back and save the tooth. Story 215. There was once a guy in China who got a male body part transplant. It had to be removed soon after the procedure because it drove the man and his wife insane. Story 216. Wales is an Anglo-Saxon word that means foreigner, but the Welsh word for Wales, Cymru, means friend. Story 217. Reddit's political and worldviews do not represent the vast majority of the world population's views. The world is far more nuanced than Reddit. Story 218. There was a short period of time at the end of the 80s where Pepsi had the 6th largest navy in the world. Pepsi Navy. Story 219. Those pictures of Chinese water deer with huge vampire fangs I thought were a hoax for years, like the drop bear. When I saw one, I was like, what the hell, that's a real thing. Story 220. Time moves slower when you are next to the bases of the Great Pyramids at Giza. Edited happens whether you are close to the base or not, but evidently it's noticeable to the naked eye. Story 221. When baby horses are in the womb, their hooves are soft and have tentacles on them to prevent them harming the mother. They look really weird, but drop off in 30 minutes. Story 222. Charlie Chaplin lost a Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest, so did Dolly Parton, who lost a Dolly Parton look-alike contest, I think. Story 223. There's a mammal that is venomous, also doesn't give birth, also it lays eggs, and had a duck bill. Story 224. Okay, I don't remember where I learned this, but I believe that it is possible to fly a plane that has only 50 of the bolts tightened. Not legally, but physically it's possible. I think that's what it was. Story 225. I grew up on the wrong side of the river, was considered by all to be the town loser, and went to work as a janitor while still in high school. Then, in my 40s, I set a goal for myself, while still working full-time, to take one class at a time until I either graduate or die, whichever comes first. At age 49, I finished my Bachelor's of Science degree. At age 52, my MBA. And age 61, my PhD. Never let the arrogant elitist define who you are or what you can be. Story 226. In Minnesota in the 70s, I was 16 taking my driver's test. Nervous as hell. A highway patrol officer was the road tester back then, which was even more nerve-wracking. But I thought I was doing pretty good the whole time because I had lots of practice with my parents. Then towards the end of the driving test, I was at a T intersection across from a hospital. I was hesitant to turn onto the road because traffic was busy. I could tell the officer was getting a little impatient, but he was nicely telling me to be a little aggressive. Suddenly at the hospital across from us, someone pushed out a screen from a window on the third floor, psych ward. A woman jumped out the window onto a garage roof underneath, then jumped to the ground and ran across the road right by us. The officer had me turn around, I was in my mom's car, and chase the girl in the neighborhood. When I would pull up to a stop sign during the chase, he would say, "Go, go, go, just go through it." After a while, when she started to get away, he gave up with me being the chase driver and told me to head back to the DMV office. I was a complete shaking mess at this point, ready to accept the fact I would not get a license anytime soon, devastating for a 16-year-old boy. He grabbed my score sheet, said, "You passed," and handed it to me. I got an 88 score. He ran to his HW patrol car and tore off to continue the chase. This is such a moving and powerful reminder that your current circumstances do not define your future. Moving from a job as a school janitor to earning a PhD at the age of 61 is the ultimate proof that it is never too late to pursue your dreams. It's a testament to human resilience and the idea that we should never stop learning, no matter how old we are. I go in the office a complete mess. My mom was already really nervous because we were gone so long. Then she saw me looking like a ghost. She said, "What happened?" Told her I passed, then told her the story on the way home. She wasn't amused and pretty pissed at the highway patrol guy. When I tell the story, I say no BS, just ask my mom. Story 227. I took my mother for a surprise trip to NYC. She got married to my father there in '68. The surprise was manufactured by way of telling her we were going to Australia. We live in New Zealand, so a trip to Australia is not a huge deal. It's the type of thing you could do for the weekend, and therefore she packed a bag and brought her passport. We got to the airport and said, "Surprise! We're going to New York," and she cried her eyes out with delight. When we arrived on our first morning, I said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" She said, "When I was last here in 1968, the Twin Towers weren't complete, so I'd like to go to the top of them." "Your wish is my command," I said, and off we went to the WTC. That was the afternoon of September 10th, 2001. Suffice it to say, there was a particular poignancy when we looked out the window at around 8 a.m. the next morning. I was at a store when Tony Hawk was signing autographs. I was only 10 at the time and was a huge fan. One of his early video games had just come out. The store had a couple TVs on the wall and some video games to play. Being a kid, I waited for one controller to open up and someone leave. A kid ended up leaving and I grabbed the controller and started playing and minding my own business. A couple minutes later, the store wanted to grab photos of Tony playing his own video game. He came over and grabbed the second controller and began to play multiplayer with me. Probably played for 10 minutes. The bonus was it was also my 10th birthday, so I played Tony Hawk Pro Skater with Tony Hawk. Edit. Wow, I made this comment and didn't return to Reddit until just now. Was not expecting it to be that big of a hit. Thank you. I do not have photos of myself playing the game with him, but I believe my parents have a couple of photos of me with him and getting his autograph. I still have the signed board on my wall. Story 228. Once in college, I applied for a job at the library help desk. I figured I would help people find books. Didn't give it much more thought than that. During the interview, I aced all of the customer service questions. Then they asked me whether I knew how to defrag a hard drive. Cue alarm bells in my head, but I kept calm outwardly and said no. "But you can teach me." I worked in IT for 3 years by accident. They were too nice to fire me. Story 229. I once won a 500 raffle during a routine visit to my local tea shop. It was the building's annual Black Friday event, and there were 5 baskets with varying amounts of goods, services, and coupons. I needed tea, so my only stop was the tea shop. It cost me $20 to fill my tins, but they said raffle tickets were given out after a $25 purchase. I said, "Fuck it," and got a hot tea for me and the woman in line behind me. Entered with that one ticket. I got a call a few days later saying I won the top prize basket. When I went to claim, they asked about my purchases. I told them, and they said the drawings had over 10 tickets, and many people had over a dozen entries. The raffle prize included $25 to the tea shop. Story 230. Worked during the summer at some kind of hotel summer camp for people from Eastern Europe, and one of my colleagues, the cook, found a wounded crow, healed it, and then trained it. The bird would sit on her shoulder when she was cooking, would come to her on command, and would share cigarettes with her, also while cooking.